Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to the Megyn Kelly Show. President Trump back at the White House. What a whirlwind 36 hours he had. In the afterglow of declaring yesterday, quote, "This is the historic dawn of a new Middle East." My God, please let that be true. Joining me now is someone we've never spoken to before, but who knows the weakness of Prime Minister Starmer all too well. Will Kingston is an Australian journalist who lives in London. He hosts the Fire at Will podcast and is a co-host of the UK's GB News' The Saturday Five. Will, welcome to the show.
G'day, Megyn. How are you?
Doing great. I love Aussies who are in the UK, like my friend Dan Wooten and others. And so your commentary the other day caught my attention, and used to go on GB News all the time as well. Great channel. But you are facing what's happening to the UK in a very acute way. And like, while we're all celebrating this peace deal today and absolutely want peace for the Middle East, one thing we don't want here in America is a ton more Muslims emigrating into the United States. Sorry, but we don't. And in the UK, it's already happened, and you've been speaking out about it. So it'd be great if we could have a peace deal where the Palestinians stay where they are, and it's rebuilt, Gaza's rebuilt, and they have a real home they can hang out in and raise their families in. But the solution is definitely not for them to come here or continuing to flood into places like the United Kingdom, which has already changed, it looks like, irrevocably. You tell me, what's your overall take on what's happening there?
Yeah, well, as an aside, that clip that we just saw with Trump and Starmer was a microcosm of the state of the UK at the moment. The nerdy loser kid who thinks for a second that maybe the cool kid is going to show him some attention, but unfortunately put back in his box pretty quickly. The word irrevocably, Megyn, is an interesting one. And this is the question, on GB News, on my podcast, but in the pubs across the UK, we talk about a lot because we've seen the decline that's happened. And we do wonder, is there a chance of reversal? That is the key question this country faces. Now, this country's gone through dark moments before. You had, the Vikings were raiding the countryside 1,000 years ago. You had the IMF in the 1970s bail out the country. You've had world wars. It's not like, and just like the US, it's not like there haven't been dark moments. The thing which concerns a lot of people is economic problems can be fixed. You can change tax policies. You can change regulations. The concern that so many people have is that swift demographic change can't just be reversed overnight. If you change your demographics, and make no mistake, the demographic change in the UK has been extraordinary in a short period of time. That is irreversible. And so a lot of people are looking at the next 3 to 4 years before a general election in the UK, and they are saying this could be the last best hope for what was once the greatest country in the world before the US took on that mantle.
I know this really caught your attention. I mean, it's been catching your attention, but you made international headlines when you really spoke out about this problem after the attack on Yom Kippur, the most holy Jewish holiday of the year, on Jews in the UK by a guy named Jihadi al-Shami, which means jihad. We know what that is. And then from Syria. So it's like jihadi from Syria. This guy unleashes a terrorist attack on Jews in the UK on Yom Kippur, driving his vehicle into a crowd outside of a synagogue in Manchester, then attacking others with a knife. 2 Jewish men were killed. At least 3 others were hospitalized. And the guy, by the way, there's no question the motivation, because he phoned the police claiming to pledge allegiance to the so-called Islamic State. So we didn't, over here, the big game is, we'll never know the motive, even if it's written on the bullets. There's no question what the motive was.
Many in the political class are still trying to say that, Megyn, make no mistake.
Yeah. Well, so you go out on your show and said in part the following. This is on the show, The Saturday Five on GB News 7.
I'm done. I'm done with the euphemisms. I'm done with the crocodile tears. I'm done with the calls for unity. I'm done being told not to hate. And I'm done skirting around uncomfortable truths. So let's list them. Uncomfortable truth 1. Multiculturalism hasn't merely failed. It has embedded sectarian violence on the streets of the UK and cost countless lives, most recently the lives of Adrian Daubly and Melvin Kravitz in Manchester. Again, strength and love to their families. Uncomfortable truth 2, diversity is not our strength. It has never been our strength, and in fact it has now become our greatest weakness economically and culturally. And I'm yet to hear any coherent argument for its value that doesn't default to, well, we get good restaurants out of it, which isn't good enough justification for complete cultural and social fracture. And besides, we've got the recipes now anyway. Uncomfortable truth 3, Islamism is a cancer on the UK, and more citizens will die as a result of appeasing it. We need to say these uncomfortable truths loudly, and whilst we still can.
Hear, hear. Good for you. You reminded me a lot of my pal Charlie Kirk as I watched you, because this is a third rail, one of the ones you're not allowed to touch, especially in the UK, and you fully embraced it. Tell me why. Like, was it just the Yom Kippur attack, or was it more?
No, it's more than that. And, rewatching that monologue, I stand by what I said. Probably may have gone a bit too heavy on the orange, on the makeup, rewatching that again, but we...
Some of the best people do.
That's exactly right. It's a tribute to the Donald. I said it because I think it is reflective of where many people are at now in the United Kingdom, in Australia, across the Anglosphere, in that 5 years ago, we were bullied into silence on these matters. You were told that if you had legitimate questions about Islam, you were called a racist. And make no mistake, this is a very deliberate attempt from the left to conflate race with culture. Race should be something that should be off limits in terms of criticism. We know that. We know this isn't controversial stuff. But religion is a choice. A cultural decision is a choice. And any sort of choice you should be able to criticise. And it is blatantly obvious, Megyn, and you know this, most of your audience knows this, there are legitimate questions to be asked around Islam when it comes to the treatment of women, when it comes to the treatment of minority groups, when it comes to the separation between church or mosque and state. And you know what? The answer that you always get is, well, I know a lovely Muslim lady or a lovely Muslim man who lives around the corner from me. And that's fine. No one's saying that there aren't nice people who are Muslims. But the problem comes, when you get to scale. And the reality is that out of the 50-odd Muslim countries in the world, 47 of them aren't democracies. The 3 that are pretty dodgy democracies. 40 of them are authoritarian hellholes. So it's very obvious that when you get to scale in Islamic cultures, you face these problems. And the problem for the UK is that we are rapidly approaching a point where there is going to be scale. By the 2050s or 2060s, I can't recall the exact number, but you're going to get to a point where somewhere between 20 to 25% of the population could be following the Islamic faith. Now, in a country where there isn't compulsory voting, interestingly in Australia there actually is, but say the US or the UK, you just need to have a sectarian voting bloc that can mobilise around an Islamic candidate, and a hardline Islamic candidate at that. And suddenly that scale I just mentioned means that you can have fundamental changes to the culture and an undermining of the Western liberal values that we in the US and the UK hold dear.
This problem has been on the radar of those paying attention for quite some time. And we're going to get to this, but just so the listening audience in the United States knows, this is our problem too. We're a lot bigger than the UK, but we have a similar issue. Muslims are now in the majority in Dearborn, Michigan. That's where Rashida Tlaib is a representative for. In Minnesota, there's a huge contingent. That's where Ilhan Omar was elected from. And you've now got the open call to prayer happening 5 times a day on the streets of some of these cities in Minnesota and in Dearborn, 5 times a day, where you hear the call to prayer and then the open praying, Allahu Akbar. Do we have that, Robert? Let's play that. Stand by. I think it's SOT 14.
The city of Minneapolis changed its noise ordinance, now allowing the Islamic call to prayer to be broadcast from speakers year-round 5 times a day. In tonight's Weekend Journal, David Schumann of WCCO reports it is a first for a major U.S. city.
This is Minneapolis.
The Muslim call to prayer, recited in here, heard out there.
It is a very simple message to share the greatness of God and to call people to success.
5 times a day, Muslims gather to pray at mosques, but the broadcast for the pre-dawn and nighttime prayers weren't allowed in Minneapolis until now. The city eliminated time constraints from the part of its noise ordinance related to religious worship. In the summer, that means the call could go out as early as 3:30 a.m. and as late as 11 p.m.
3:30 a.m., people in Minneapolis hearing the call to prayer, and then everybody's down on their knees saying Allahu Akbar. This is happening in the United States, but it's overwhelming already in the UK, which opened its borders about 15 years ago and is now paying the price.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about that clip, Megyn, is how that the local council or authority changed their ordinances in order to make this happen. And it's a small example, but it's a very powerful example of how countries like the UK and the US are going out of their way to change their rules, their customs, their laws, their regulations in order to be kind and tolerant and to embrace this multicultural ideology which we have been, which has been thrust upon us now for 20 or 30 years. I grew up in a school in Sydney in Australia. I remember in the curriculum, multiculturalism was just taught as this inarguable good. It was just something which you should accept as tolerance, kindness, compassion, diversity, all that sort of stuff. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, when these people say this stuff, all they ever do really is they say, A, well, you get good restaurants out of the deal, or B, they just keep using the word diversity as if it is a good in and of itself. I'm yet to hear the business case for multiculturalism or diversity. I'm yet to hear actually, right, okay, there are obviously the problems of sectarian violence that this causes. There are obviously the problems of the dilution of the culture. And I just don't think it's good enough for countries like Australia or the UK or the US to say, well, you know what, just because we get, good kebabs out of the deal, suddenly we need to start diminishing our own culture. And I think more people need to start making this argument with a bit more courage and a bit more intelligence, because we are on the right side of this argument, but we've been bullied by a relatively small, powerful elite across these countries for too long. And when you can put logic back against that, I think it is an argument that we can win. And Trump has shown that in the US.
I mean, there is no way that one of these large Middle Eastern countries, whether it's Saudi Arabia or, beyond, wants an influx of Caucasian Americans or Brits who refuse to assimilate and want to change culture there. A bunch of feminists from the Upper West Side moving to Saudi is not something they desire, and they don't need to desire it. Who could blame them? They have their own culture, their own ways, and that's fine for them. That's one of the things Trump understands. He doesn't need to change everybody else's culture. There are opportunities to work with people economically, understanding they're different than we are.
Yep.
But this wasn't the approach. I mean, I remember when I was on Fox News back around 2010, 2015, that whole time frame, what the biggest story in the world was, in particular in Germany, Angela Merkel opening up the German borders, in particular to Syrian refugees. And the UK was doing it too, all in the name of tolerance. And now here we are 15 years later, and the cultures have fundamentally changed. These people did not assimilate.
Yep. Tolerance and historic guilt. The German example is a very good one. And obviously historic guilt is rife within Germany, which is one of the reasons that they did that. You mentioned the Upper West Side. I lived in New York for a few years. I saw this. And the trend line that you have seen on the left is so bizarre. If you actually looked at this, it could be a Babylon Bee article, in that you have this bizarre combination now of far left, loony, progressive identity politics warriors and leftist and regressive conservative Muslims. And it is so obviously an incompatible combination with the one thread that binds them together, which is a desire to tear down Western civilization. Now, I don't think that thread is enough to hold that coalition together in the long term, but that is what is happening on the left. That is what is behind the rise of people like Mamdani. That is what is behind the rise of the far left in the UK as well. It is an incompatible coalition, with the one exception that the goal is to tear down what we have built and cherished over thousands of years, and then what the US progressed and built upon from 1776.
And to your point, there are definitely Muslims here and in the UK who have assimilated and just want to live an American life. And that's great. Nobody has any problem with them. It's those who want to Islamicize their new countries to whom we object and whom we must fight, because we don't want to Islamicize the United States of America, nor do you want to Islamicize the UK. Because as Charlie was saying in a special we did, I was running clips of him 2 Sundays ago, Islam is not compatible with Western values. It cannot become the majority. We do not want that to become the dominant cultural or religious strain in our country or yours for really good reasons, some of which you hit on in your monologue.
Yeah. What do you put it down to, Megyn? Because again, for me, and I think for you and for your audience, most sensible people, it is very obvious that in Islamic culture, particularly fundamentalist Islamic cultures, but I would even argue with moderate Muslims, it is obvious that women are second-class citizens. Yep. It is obvious that minority groups are treated appallingly, and yet the very same people who will march out on the streets with rainbow flags in saying we need to protect these oppressed groups are also willing to turn a blind eye. And I find it, like, frankly, hypocritical, but also just a bit, I remain confused by it. What do you put it down to?
I mean, you mean the difference between those who want to assimilate and those who don't?
No, I mean, how can you? Let's think about, your typical purple-haired lefty loony on campus who will argue for trans rights, but at the same time they will also turn a blind eye to the obvious cultural problems at the fringe of Islamic culture, and I would dare say at the mainstream of Islamic culture in many of these countries. That cognitive dissonance that is there, what do you put that down to? How can they turn that blind eye?
They're ruled by that oppression narrative, and it starts, there's nothing greater, not sexuality, not gender identity, than skin color. That is the be-all, end-all for many of these people. And brown and black people must be elevated above whites no matter what, because that's the ultimate oppression scale. And if that means that as a gay person you have to get thrown off the top of a building in Palestine because you're a white gay, so be it. That's really how their thinking goes. It makes no sense. It's really radical, but there's no other conclusion, because we've seen the clashes in the streets, where the people are holding up like gays for Hamas, and then they get shouted down by Muslims who are like, "What? Get out! You're not part of our coalition. We're not in favor of gays. We don't believe in this lifestyle." And that you see the light bulb go off. But what do you mean? But I support you. I'm against Israel. I don't like Jews, just like you. And you see these more radical Muslims being like, you are not part of our coalition, nor do we want you to be. And even then, these people would get out there because there's social cachet in saying that you're anti-Israel, you're pro-Hamas, or you're somehow for these oppressed Muslims in these other countries. Most of the Middle East is very rich. They're not oppressed. They don't need our help.
Yep. But this is such a good point as well, and that is so much of this comes back to status. Back in the 80s or 90s, the way that you would demonstrate status would be, the Ferrari, the big house, trophy wife with the big boobs. That is how you demonstrated high society status. And now, and Rob Henderson's been wonderful on this, it is that sort of luxury beliefs. But the thing which I am encouraged by, and I think this has been accelerated in the US with Trump, but I think it's happening in the UK now as well, is people are now just pushing back and saying, you know what, call me a racist. You know what, call me a bigot. I don't care anymore. Call me a Nazi, call me far right. The words have lost all meaning. And if you're going to call me a racist or far right, and that's the price that I have to pay to protect my own culture, to protect women and children who are being sexually assaulted at increasing rates in the United Kingdom today, I'm very happy to be called a racist in order to stop that from happening. And we can get to this, but the importation of crime, and particularly sexual crime in the UK over the last 20 odd years, has been absolutely terrifying. And you and I both know, as well as the audience, there is only one major variable that has happened in the last 20 years that would mean that you would get that spike in sexual assault and sexual violence in places like London.
Yeah, especially in the UK. Here, there's another variable, which is we went completely soft on crime after George Floyd and installed soft on crime DAs and soft on crime police departments and defunded cops and so on. But yes, I know we've been watching the rape crisis in the UK and largely perpetrated by these Muslim immigrants, which you're not allowed to say, but it's true. So too bad. I'm on the side of the women and the girls getting raped. I don't really give a shit about offending the rapists. But yeah, revolving door when it comes to the treatment of those guys. And in the United States, we've seen, yes, this uptick in crime and also an uptick in sexual crimes. I wanted to make a comment about the Yom Kippur attack because Jihadi, our pal Jihadi, al-Shami, again from Syria, he was out on bail, right? On bail from a rape accusation. This very guy comes to the UK, and I guess he came when he was a kid, but like by the time he was 16, he got UK citizenship. And what does he do? He allegedly rapes a woman, then gets out pending trial, and commits this mass murder in the name of some ISIS type group.
Yep. Let me, for the audience, lay it out as simply as I can try and understand it. Someone whose name literally translates to jihadi from Syria is granted citizenship to the United Kingdom. After being gifted that from the people of the United Kingdom, he goes out and is arrested for the rape of a woman. Whilst on bail for the rape of a woman, he slaughters Jews on the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur. Now, what does that point to? It points to number one, fundamental problems in the Home Office in the UK to say that, well, you know what, all cultures are equal, and so we're going to turn a blind eye to that sort of person coming to the country. But B, the ideological capture of the judiciary in this country is terrifying, Megyn. So you may have heard as well that one of the big problems this country is facing is an illegal boats crisis. So I think a couple of days ago, there were over 1,000 people coming in on rubber dinghies from Calais in France, across the English Channel, arrive on the beaches of Dover. And as a result of that, what do in the UK? They don't put them in detention centres and then move them eventually back to their country of origin.
Like they do in your home country.
They do in my home country successfully.
Australia does not F around when it comes to boats of foreigners arriving on its shores, to its credit. Keep going.
And you know what? We don't get boats with foreigners arriving on our shores anymore because if you create a disincentive, people stop coming. In the UK, what happens is they put you in a hotel, they give you an allowance every week, and it is almost impossible to deport you because there is this legal framework which has been created all around international human rights law, which basically says if you are to be deported back to a country, you may be at risk of persecution. So once they arrive here, they're effectively stuck here. And there are some, again, it's almost like Babylon Bee-esque stories that you hear of reasons why judges have allowed these people who are criminals. I'll do my best Tom Homan impersonation. If you arrive illegally, you're a criminal. And these judges find these ways to interpret international human rights law in order to keep them there. There was one judge the other day, and one of the reasons why this person couldn't be deported was because that his daughter did not like the taste of chicken nuggets back in his home country of Bulgaria. I can keep going with these sorts of insane reasons. But when you have these laws that can then get interpreted by lefty judges, the end result is once these people come here, you are stuck with them. And so the judiciary as well, and again, this also goes for the US, and you think about Soros-appointed judges as well, it is such an important part of this story and something which on the right, we really need to get right.
The thing is, the people who came to America 30, 40, 50 years ago generally came for a better life, wanting to assimilate, wanting to be American and raise their kids as American Muslims. That makes sense to me. But the people who have come in the past 15 years don't seem to want to assimilate at all, for the most part. I mean, the vast majority of them in your country or in mine. And those people are a problem. And they call themselves asylum seekers or refugees, whatever the name is. But they seem to want to import their culture into our respective countries. They're the ones who are harassing women wearing tank tops on the streets of France, Germany, and the UK. And now in the UK, you mentioned the sex crimes. The Telegraph reported just this past March that foreigners were convicted of up to 23% of the sex crimes happening in the UK per the Ministry of Justice statistics there. So they don't make up 23% of the population yet, but they're committing 23% of the sex crimes. And then a further 8% on top of that are recorded from unknown nationalities. So obviously those are foreign. Yeah, those are. Yeah. So we were talking about 1/3 of the sex crimes in the UK. And there was just a huge scandal that broke last spring of all these like foreign nationals who are in the UK who are raping young girls and getting away with it. Like the whole system was covering up for them because they didn't want to confront the uncomfortable fact that these were brown and black men raping young white English girls. And they thought it was somehow racist to be throwing the full, book at them.
Yep. And thinking about an audience in America, I guess the closest equivalent would be turning a blind eye to crime committed in parts of the African American community because of a historic guilt about the mistreatment of African Americans. And of course, that is certainly the case that has happened, but that doesn't mean that is an excuse not to treat people on their merits in this day and age. I'm not sure, Megyn, how much on the show you've heard or spoken about the Pakistani Muslim grooming gang scandal in the UK, but
not much. We should have done more. But Elon was going mad about it a few months ago, and we took a deep dive into it.
And thank the Lord for Elon Musk for bringing that to the global consciousness, because I'm not sure it would have otherwise. But for the audience, very simply, for decades and decades, perhaps going back to the 1960s, 1970s, there have been largely Pakistani Muslim communities in working class parts of the UK that have set up grooming gangs and have sexually abused and in many cases murdered young white girls. And the police establishment, the politicians and the media have largely turned a blind eye because of cultural sensitivity and because of a fear of being called racist. In my opinion, it is not just the greatest scandal in modern UK history, it's one of the greatest scandals in modern Western history. Now, thank the Lord again that finally there is going to be an inquiry on this, but this story is in many ways the story of our times across the UK and the West, where we're willing to say, all cultures are equal and therefore we need to appease bad behaviour, as opposed to standing up and saying, you know what, we have values as a Western liberal democracy, we need to stand by them. But also, maybe I'm being a bit too fluffy and philosophical there, we need to actually make sure that we are protecting women and children. And who cares if, you're going to potentially offend a member of a minority community, because that's where, unfortunately, the UK found itself in the last 20 odd years.
Well, for sure, we have to enforce the law, and in particular the criminal law. But it's the thing that you're calling attention to is much bigger and in some ways more important, which is don't seed the culture. Don't allow in millions of foreigners whose values are different than yours, whose religion is different from the majority religion of your country, and who have no wish to assimilate and become British or American in our case. Don't stop doing that. We have a country to save.
But isn't it extraordinary, right? So I can give you data, and I can give, people who are on the left data. For example, in the UK, Afghan immigrants are 22 to 23 times more likely to commit sexual assault than someone who was born in the United Kingdom. They've got a whole list now where they go down, and you can basically see if you are from Afghanistan or Eritrea or Somalia, you are by a magnitude higher more likely to commit that. Now, of course, does that mean that everyone who comes from those countries is committing those crimes? Of course it doesn't. But what it does mean, it is an unacceptable risk to actually, as part of your immigration policy, just open slather, allow people in from those countries which don't have compatible values. I was on GB News the other night, and I was debating a former defence minister, the Pete Hegseth equivalent in the UK, and he was disputing that data. And he was running with that same old line, which we've heard so many times before: we're all human beings, all cultures are equal. And I was trying to break through to him. I was trying to work out, how do you communicate this? And I said, Bill, mate, like, let's go back to first principles. Surely if you come from a country where A, you've had little to no education, B, women are treated as second-class citizens, and C, it is a barbaric backwater. Think Afghanistan, where at the moment, if a woman reads in public, they are publicly beaten. If you're then to come to the UK, do you think you magically change your worldview overnight?
Right.
Of course you're more likely to import those views in. But for some reason, and again, it is ideological, there is this disconnect where these people seem to think that if you come from a third world backwater and then you arrive in the United States, suddenly you will magically become, a Western liberal advocate, and you'll, start quoting Thomas Jefferson, and you'll start, pledging, to the flag, and you'll have the flag up in your garden. It just doesn't work that way, Megyn.
Yeah, you'll be pro-gay rights. You'll be pro-First Amendment.
Right.
It's not happening. I want to point out, I mentioned that these foreigners are accounting for 23% of the British sex crimes. They're only 6% of the population. So 4 million are Muslims in the UK out of 67 million. So they're 6% of the population committing 23% of the sex crimes. Go ahead.
And this is one of the other funny things that you hear in this argument, is it is amazing how lefties don't seem to understand per capita statistics. So one of the things you'll always hear is something like, well, what about all the white people that are committing crimes? There's still many more, white rapists than there are foreign rapists in the United Kingdom or in say, Australia, for example. And of course, the answer is per capita. They are dramatically overrepresented. But the other point to make is, unfortunately, there are going to be scumbags in every country that you're stuck with. If you're born as an American,
you have to take the Brits. They were born there. You're stuck with them. Same thing in America. We don't have to take in immigrants who are also criminals and have a propensity to commit crime based on these numbers. Islamists are not in favor of free speech at all. And this is another incongruity between their culture and ours. And unfortunately, in the UK right now, there's been a horrific crackdown on free speech, similar to what we've been seeing in Germany. The Times of London reporting in April that police make 30 arrests a day now in the UK for offensive online messages. 30 a day. Thousands of people are being detained and questioned for sending messages that cause, quote, annoyance, inconvenience, or anxiety to others, which is really dangerous because one of the things that can get you arrested is if you say something considered hateful about Muslims. And this is exactly the thing that Christopher Hitchens, a Brit himself, was warning against back in 2009 in what's become a very famous clip. We'll play it now, SOT 8.
Yeah, please.
This is very urgent business, ladies and gentlemen. I beseech you. Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing. You will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry, whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion. Watch out for these symptoms. They are just symptoms of surrender, very often ecumenically offered to you by men of God in other robes, Christian and Jewish and smarmy ecumenical. These are the ones who will hold open the gates for the barbarians. The barbarians never take a city till someone holds the gates open for them. And it's your own preachers who will do it for you, and your own multicultural authorities who will do it for you. Resist it while you can.
So brilliant, so prescient. And that business about Islamophobia being used as though it's an accusation of racism is important. It's okay. I think it's fine. Islamophobia, what does that mean? I don't want actual Islam, like the deep tenets of Islam taking over my country because it's inconsistent with our fundamental values as a people. That's fine. If that makes me an Islamophobe, great. Okay, then I am. I don't care.
Yeah, it's a word that is used by fascists to manipulate morons, Megyn. It is a nonsense term. I've watched that clip from Hitchens hundreds of times. 16 years ago, He wrote that. He said that the prescience is extraordinary. It is absolutely extraordinary, and it is where we are at today. I am so insanely jealous of your First Amendment. I would dearly, dearly love to have the equivalent of a First Amendment in the United Kingdom, but we don't have that. That statistic, again, which many people who are watching the show at the moment in the US, may not even believe. 30 people a day, give or take, are being arrested for tweets or social media posts or whatever. But what you alluded to is it is all because you may have caused distress or offence, which again is entirely subjective. I'm offended by the fact that my free speech is being taken away, just as much as someone else may be offended by some sort of silly comment that may be made. Now, the problem that I think we have on the right, and I think there's problems here in the US as well, I don't think the arguments for free speech in the US are being made as strongly as perhaps they once were, is it is sometimes very difficult to make the argument to say you should be allowed to say hateful, nasty, bigoted, awful things, because on balance, it is still better to have that out in the open than to have one centralised body deciding what you can and cannot say. But here's the thing, if you do make that argument, a lot of people on the left will say, oh, okay, so you're in favour of Nazism, are you? Or, oh, okay, you're in favour of racism, are you? And it's not the point. But where we need to get to, and it shows like this, and Megyn, you've been incredibly strong on this, how do we make the argument better for free speech in countries like the UK and the US? Because particularly in the UK, it is being taken away bit by bit by bit.
We are watching things over in the UK that are really telling. We talked about what happened on Yom Kippur. Interestingly, Muhammad has overtaken Noah as the most popular boy's name in the UK. Yep. And there's different ways to spell Muhammad, but the multiple ways of spelling it are all in the top 100. But Muhammad has overtaken Noah as the number one most popular name for boys in the UK. That's telling. Yep. Then on top of that, there's an issue about flying the British flag in some communities, where you're getting more and more objections in these heavily Muslim communities to the flying of the British flag, which now is being said is somehow uncomfortable or targeting or offensive to Muslim communities. There's a Labour member of parliament, that's the more liberal group, calling for flags to be removed, citing alleged safety risks, saying they make constituents uncomfortable in their own communities. He wants the flags removed from lampposts, saying, again, this is a safety issue, he claims. His name is Jeevan Sandher. And he went through the exercise of saying, oh, well, some of the flags have become like in disrepair and they risk detaching and falling into the mud. He's also making clear that they think these flags are unwelcoming to many of his constituents and made them uncomfortable in their own community. Here is the soundbite of this guy. It's Sat 9.
It's time to take down the lamppost flags. And you know, because you've seen it online and I see it in my inbox, that this does make people feel uneasy. And they ask, what message are these flags supposed to be sending? Now look, I'll take people at their words. People who say this is about national pride. I'm proud of my country too, and I'm proud of our flag. But I do understand why others feel that it's about excluding people. Why others feel that it's about saying who belongs here and who doesn't. We're one British people. We're proud of our country. We should be standing together underneath our flag, not some of us looking up with unease. That's not the British way. That's why today I'll be asking the Reform County Council to take down the flags on the lampposts.
Unbelievable, Will.
Bugger off. And the reason I was laughing for, Megyn, is having lived in the US, again, I can hear the audience just going, how utterly bizarre, because a country which is so proud of its flag. Traditionally, the UK probably hasn't quite been like that and I think this is something which I absolutely love about the United States, is the overt patriotism. But But just because of the British psyche, it isn't quite like that. It's probably more of a quiet, reserved, sense of comfort in one's country. But in the last few months, and this has been led by so many of the problems that we've just talked about, largely working class Brits have said, right, we need to send some sort of a signal that we are A, against mass immigration, B, we are uncomfortable with where the country is going. And the answer has been what's been dubbed the Raise the Flag campaign. And it's a wonderful tribute to the power of social media, because it's all been led by grassroots social media campaigns. So across the country, admittedly, again, in largely northern parts of England. So London, for example, you're not going to see it. It would be like the equivalent of, someone in West Village showing that sort of patriotism. It's just not going to happen. But in many parts of the UK, there is a sense of pride, and that is being demonstrated through the flags. But it started this culture war, because you have people like that, idiot that we just saw, who said, well, unfortunately, the flag of the country makes some people from oppressed minority groups feel uncomfortable, despite the fact that they're more than happy to have Palestinian flags waving down the streets of London every single week. There was a British soccer player, a guy called Gary Neville. He played for England about 85 times. I think Tom Brady equivalent. And he now runs a construction company. And he came out the other day and said he saw a flag on one of his sites, and he said, immediately I took it down because it was obviously violent and threatening to the minority people in the country. But here's the thing, Megyn, if we can't rally around that one thing, the flag should be the one thing that unites everyone, black, white, Muslim, Christian, atheist, whatever. If you don't have that one thing that binds you together, then you don't, what do you have left? And this is unfortunately where we are getting to in the UK. And if you look at places like Minneapolis, unfortunately, there is a trend line in the US. We are entering a period where you will just have sectarian ghettos which are divided along ethnic and cultural lines and run according to the values of whatever hellhole country that those people have come from initially. And this is the warning that Americans who are watching this need to heed when you look at the United Kingdom, because whilst it's not there to the same extent, I'm sure people, and again, if you're watching this from Minneapolis, you would be seeing this day in, day out. If we don't find that common unifying thread that binds us all together, we will become sectarian countries that are governed by cultures that are antithetical to what the founding fathers in the US and the drafters of the Magna Carta in the UK believe so strongly in.
Right, like free speech, like separation of church and state, like women's rights and minority rights. Speaking of Minneapolis, there is a mayoral candidate there, Omar Fateh, and this guy's been making a lot of headlines for his positions. He's running for mayor of Minneapolis, which is already run by a very far left woke guy, Jacob Fry, who is on his knees with his mask on.
This was the guy who took the knee at George Floyd's funeral, crying.
Yep. You got it. So he's being challenged by this Muslim man named Omar Fateh, who had the following to say to the constituents there in February of 2023. Here he is in SOT 16.
We heard them being called terrorists. We heard them being called drug dealers. We heard a lot of insults. We heard that they're a threat to our national security. And that's a flat out lie. You want to know who the real threat is, Madam President? I'll give you a hint. They don't look like our chief author. They don't look like the folks up in the gallery. They don't look like the folks out in the rotunda. They look like many of the members that sit in the front. And you don't have to take my word for it. According to DHS, Madam President, the greatest domestic threat facing the United States comes from, quote, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically those who advocate for the superiority of the white race, not our immigrants. We are safer and we're better off because of them.
This guy he's in the Minneapolis State Senate now. He actually referred to Somalia as home when he was running for office. Home. Okay, that's Minneapolis. I mean, a major American city. And they're not even as bad as Dearborn, Michigan, which is run by majority Muslims now. And where I'll just give you one more, Will. By the way, we're talking to Will Kingston, co-host of the Saturday 5 on GB News, about cultural non-assimilation by more radical Muslims in his country and ours. In Dearborn, Michigan, not far away, there was a Muslim mayor. There is a Muslim mayor there now. His name is Abdullah Hamoud, who told a local resident, a Christian minister named Ted Barnum, who was objecting to streets being named after a pro-terror Arab leader, that he needed to get out. Told the white Christian leader he should get out of Dearborn if he didn't like it. Listen to this soundbite here. My team will get it. I don't know which number it is. I think it's 11. It's not 11.
Because you are a bigot, and you are a racist, and you are an Islamophobe. And although you live here, I want you to know as mayor, you are not welcome here. And the day you move out of the city will be the day that I launch a parade celebrating the fact that you moved out of the city.
Unbelievable. Your thoughts, Will?
Well, the thing is that these are at the moment still, as a percentage of the entire population, small groups, but they have national consequences. Like, it's that sort of group in Dearborn, Michigan, was fundamentally the reason why Josh Shapiro wasn't the vice presidential candidate for the Democrats, and instead it was that absolute non-entity Tim Walz. It's because that the Democrats were scared of putting a Jew into that position because they were scared of losing votes from Muslims in Dearborn, Michigan. These things aren't just isolated to these particular little cultural areas. If you think, well, look, I live in, a plush little part of Manhattan, this isn't going to affect me, there are national ramifications to all of this stuff. Again, both in the US and in the and in the UK. But the other thing that I would say about the I'm sorry, Megyn, I've forgotten the name of the Somali candidate who was running to be mayor.
Omar Fateh in Minneapolis.
What Omar would say, and you would cop this every day, is, well, the people who are opposing me are just trying to promote division. You would be, Megyn Kelly, she is trying to divide us. Will Kingston on GB News, trying to divide us. Whenever you hear that expression from the left, what they say, people who are trying to divide us, what they mean is people who we disagree with. What he just said in that clip, I can't possibly think of something which would be a more divisive thing to say. And yet the reason why they say this is because that there is one establishment narrative that they want to enforce. And if you do not go along with it, you are the divider. And because we are the kind and compassionate left, we're therefore have the moral authority to be able to run that narrative. So I think, across the board, if you are, I'm not even going to say on the right, if you're sensible, we need to push back against this division nonsense, because quite frankly, it is just a tool for left-wing people to say, go along with our story, or otherwise we are going to bully you, we are going to oppress you, we are going to censor you, we're going to shut you up.
No, and Islamicists, they don't want to live peacefully next door to you. They want to impose their way of life and their religion on you. It's completely antithetical to Western values. So it's not live and let live. We just want to move to America or the UK, which we think is beautiful and has, wonderful education systems. No, they actually want to change the way we are living. By the way, in his city, in Minneapolis, you've got, or in Minnesota, his state, it's 82,000 and change people of Somali descent are living in Minnesota right now. It's home to the largest Somali population in the United States. 58% of them were born in Somalia, so it's not like they're third generation. They were born in Somalia and came here relatively recently. 34% of them speak English less than very well. 40% are below the poverty line. 42% of those over 25 years old have less than a high school degree, and only 68% of working age Somali adults are employed. So you've got some, 1/3 just about, who are unemployed. So this is not exactly our best group. And why we'd want to be importing more of them remains a mystery, other than this multiculturalism lie that we just discussed. Here's just now, we're switching back and forth between Minneapolis, Minnesota and Dearborn, Michigan. But let me go back to Dearborn, Michigan, where the mayor is really concerned about the Christian minister and his objection to naming the street after this guy. Here's what's happening on the streets of Dearborn, Michigan. This is just April of 2024, SOT 13.
Malcolm X said, and I quote, "We live in one of the rottenest countries that has ever existed on this earth. It's not Genocide Joe that has to go. It's the entire system that has to go. Any system that would allow such atrocities and such devilry to happen and would support it, such a system does not deserve to exist on God's earth." And so when these fools ask us if Israel has the right to exist, the chant "Death to Israel" has become the most logical chant shouted across the world today.
Death to Israel. By the way, here's just a peek at...
They're not subtle, are they?
No, same city, Dearborn, Michigan. August, just this past August, a couple months ago, Salem news anchor narrating reports of some 40,000 Shia Muslims in the streets. Dearborn, Michigan. Watch.
40,000 Muslims packed the streets in Dearborn, Michigan for a religious Aberdeen march, raising red flags on the increasing Islamic influence in America. Many are now pointing to calls that have been made by Muslims to take down America, saying their people are willing to fight and give their lives to bring America down. The event is being described as the largest Aberdeen procession in the United States. It's a Shia religious event observed primarily by Shia Muslims and celebrates the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, the grandson of their prophet Muhammad. This annual pilgrimage draws millions worldwide to Karbala in Iraq, but it's now starting to build on American soil. The event transformed a typical suburban roadway into a sea of black-clad marchers chanting religious slogans, waving flags, and carrying banners, a scene more reminiscent of the Middle East than the Midwest.
It's really crazy to see. And the vast majority of the media, well, completely ignores it.
Well, Donald Trump has done us an enormous favour in the West. Obviously, he's achieved one of the great geopolitical achievements in modern history, but it will also lead to an interesting social experiment, Megyn. And that is this peace plan, and assuming it goes ahead, and look, you know, there are still some ifs and buts that will need to take place, but this looks like an extraordinary achievement. Do we think that these sorts of marches will stop? Do we think that the pro-genocide crowd will suddenly, you know, pack up and go home? And my guess is no. My guess is because these protests that we've seen over the last 2 years have never been really about Palestinian statehood. They've never really been about the plight of the Palestinians. They've been about A, the destruction of Israel, and B, more generally to that clip, the destruction of Western civilization. So what I think we will see, even if they get absolutely everything that they have asked for, and from what I can see in that peace plan, they're getting pretty much everything that they have asked for, you will continue to see these types of protests. And so therefore, the only answer in my mind is that countries like the UK and the US need to fundamentally rethink how they approach immigration, because you're not going to be able to change the minds of people who are radicalised and who from a very young age have a particular ideology which is antithetical to the West. And if I may just add one more thing, Megyn, it is extraordinary that some of these countries don't get that. So on the same day of that Yom Kippur attack that we mentioned, there was a Labor minister, Labor being the equivalent of the Democrats, who said, "We're proud to announce that we've just let in a new wave of Gazan students into the UK on scholarships to study in universities." Wow. Now, I think it's a tragedy that those people have been brought up in a society which is run by Hamas, where they've been indoctrinated in their schooling system to hate Jews from a young age, where there is obviously a two-tier society where women are treated as inferior. That's a tragedy. But at the same time, it's happened, and those people will, more likely than not, hold those views when they get onto campus at a UK university. Australia is also letting in Gazan refugees at the same time. So we've got to stop and think for a second. Do we want to prioritize that warm and fuzzy feeling that you apparently get when you're helping the less fortunate in bad, war-torn parts of the world? Or do we want to prioritize the safety and well-being of the citizens of the UK and the United States? I think for me, it's a pretty obvious answer.
It's really crazy when you see it like spreading. You know, Dearborn is huge, Minneapolis is huge, and we're about to elect Zohran Mamdani as the mayor of New York City, whose wife is in the news today for celebrating the death of a Palestinian influencer who openly glorified the 10/7 attacks. Yep. She openly wrote beloved Jafarawi on her Instagram story with 4 broken heart emojis on Sunday. She's super sad that this guy who absolutely loved 10/7 was killed. That's going to be our new first lady of the greatest city in the world, bar none, New York, as of November, if the polls don't change. Andrew Cuomo is now within some 10 to 12 points of Mamdani, but Curtis Lewa, the Republican, has 15% of the vote and will not drop out. I can't stand Andrew Cuomo at all, but I would take him any day over this Zohran Mamdani, who's going to bring an entirely different set of values to office, some of which we've discussed here, some of which are just far left socialist values. But either way, he's about to ruin the greatest city in the world.
Yeah, and as someone who has lived in New York and had the great privilege of living in New York, it breaks my heart to see it. It absolutely breaks my heart. But it also goes to show that there is this Western, liberal, well-educated group of people who are willing to overlook all of the challenges that we've just mentioned in order to virtue signal. And part of me, Megyn, and this will sound fatalistic, this will sound, we can argue about this, but part of me goes, we need to see the consequences of the actions of someone like a Mamdani for people to wake up and realise that you cannot just, put up placards and posters and virtue signal and everything's going to be okay. Elections have consequences. Ideologies have consequences. The same thing is going to happen and is happening in the UK. So sadly, what was that old H.L. Mencken quote? It was something like, democracy is the belief that people deserve, that people should get what they vote for, and they should get it good and hard. And unfortunately, I think New Yorkers are about to be bent over, and they're about to get it good and hard. And that's a democracy. That's what they're going to choose, and there are going to be consequences to that.
Wow. I mean, it's crazy to watch the open borders that we saw happen. I mean, Europe was doing it long before the United States did it under Joe Biden. And now you guys are living the real life consequences of it. And we're already having soft on crime consequences come our way. But this, the takeover of our major American cities by people who do not share our values. Some of the chants that we were seeing in Dearborn, Michigan over the past couple of years since 10/7 are death to America, not just death to Israel, death to America, as they walk by the open call to prayer. I mean, the things are changing rapidly. And unless people here find the stones to speak out the way you did on GB News over there, once you'd gotten to your breaking point, we're going to get a whole lot more just like this. I'll give you the last word, Will.
Yeah, very simply, the only cure for cancel culture, Megyn, is courage culture. And that is something which I think, and look, we are very fortunate that we have a platform in the media. Many people don't. And it is incredibly difficult if you've got a job and you've got kids to feed and you've got a mortgage to pay to go out and to say the type of stuff that we are saying. But I stress to everyone who has the ability to be able to do so, or the courage to be able to do so, either support people like Megyn Kelly or support, people who are standing up in the media and are saying these things, or remember that if you say something in a sensible way, a logical way, there's no need to be aggressive or whatever. But if you are logical, if you are sensible, and if you are principled, we can change this discourse. It will just require a bit of courage.
Let me tell you something. This is an area in which people haven't found courage. I think 5 years after Black Lives Matter, people have found some courage there. They've certainly found some courage on the trans front. But the Muslim takeover of major American cities and UK cities is something people are still very reluctant to address head on. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately because I just did this long piece on Charlie and how people called him an Islamophobe, but he was very outspoken on this issue because he was an ardent Christian and he saw the conflict coming. And they've silenced Charlie. And I actually felt a need to stand up on this issue. And then I saw your piece and I thought there's somebody actually doing it in his country too. And today, Will, I'm actually headed to the White House for the posthumous awarding to Charlie of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And I just thought this is a perfect day to stand up for something that was near and dear to his heart. To your point, no one's asking for open maltreatment or mistreatment of anybody who happens to be Muslim, but people who are Muslim and trying to change the UK or the United States or Western countries into something that is more akin to Somalia or Gaza are going to have a fight on their hands. We do need to stand up to them and fight for the countries that we love. So that's what we're doing. Thank you for helping lead the way, Will.
No, thank you, Megyn. I appreciate it.
All the best to you. You should watch the whole segment. You can Google it. And you can see Will Kingston, host of the Saturday 5, which is kind of like The 5 on Fox. And also Fire at Will, his show. So thank you all so much for watching us. Tomorrow, Jack Posobiec will be here. I'm going to see him later today at the event that I just mentioned, which I got to get off to now. We'll see you then. Thanks for listening.